Give her a round of applause.
Thank you. So today we'll talk about one of my most difficult coding feats to date. It's how I built something that I had no idea how to create. It's a long tale of ups and downs, emotional dread, fear, and a lot of crying. So the workflow project was born out of a necessity for my job. I was a developer and a designer, and I spent a lot of time working on emails, which makes me a pretty big email geek. So for those of you not familiar, this is some code that is used to make an email. It looks a little bit crazy and breaks many conventional rules for coding, but it's a really old style of coding, so before any other email geeks appear and get agitated, code for email has progressed a lot since then. But this email was specifically made for Outlook, which is pretty much like the red-headed stepchild of the email world. So it has to be even more old school than normal. So my company ran an event every year. It was a live continuing education event. It was going into its third year. It was also the most aggressive in terms of emails that needed to be made and would be sent. Each of the 6 cities had between 17 to 31 emails that needed to be sent, with a minimum of 40,000 sends per city. This total comes to about over 5 million emails that would be sent in the course of this event. So how do you send emails that need to be grouped and tailored to cities, to each city? Well, this is how I did it originally. My method for creating emails was copying and pasting. So I used one email as a base, and then I copied that to create a new bastardized email spawn. And then this included manually making changes to each of those spawns. And as you can see, it kind of gets out of control real fast. And this visualizes how faulty that system is in general. It's not very good to take old emails and just manually update them. It creates an unsustainable, hot mess of a system with no organization nor rhyme or reason. Also, I was the only person doing email development or design for this event. So for me, the problem is pretty glaring. There are a lot of things to do. There are emails to design and develop. There are different versions of each of those and the inevitable redesigns. But there is only one of me. So using prior experience making these, because this is the third year that we've done this, I knew that there would be complications. All these event emails are being done on top of my normal day work. It wasn't like I was only working on this project. I still had my monthly emails to complete, which would do the first and last week of each month, any individual emails to do throughout the month, and I was also maintaining articles on the website and designing and developing microsites. My head was hurting pretty hard, and I was really worried. This is a lot of stuff to do and not a lot of time to complete it in. If I already knew some things, I wouldn't feel so anxious, but without knowing a direction to go, I was feeling really out of my league. I knew one thing, though, that there had to be a better way than this. The first step to take was identifying the problems that I wanted to solve and then figuring out solutions. So here's where I started breaking down past problems and potential future problems. I came up with a list of problems that were stopping me from having a seamless system for email generation. I wanted to cut down on errors, so manual insertion and updating information was a major problem for me. I don't know about you, but I'm really bad at spelling. So when quick changes happen, like updates to the schedule, sponsor, or speaker, I needed a better way to maintain these changes for all emails, and a better way to maintain changes from older versions to new versions of the emails. To fix inconsistency, since all changes needed to be assumed moving forward, sometimes when moving quickly, it's easy to forget all the changes that needed to be made. When making changes from version to version, it became harder to quality control and maintain this consistency in each email. I needed a method of organization to keep both development and design in sync and know what I was working on and what it should look like. I needed a method to keep information up to date and deliver it to all emails and keep them constantly updated. And finally, I just generally needed to make emails faster. I sometimes needed to have many emails done in a short period of time, and when all of these changes are being made by hand by me, and when I need to double check and verify that I didn't make any mistakes with manual changes, building these could take longer than I wanted them to. So now that I have a problem listed out, it's time to look for solutions. So I started with research, where everybody does, by Googling. So I Googled a lot of terms, and I was going around the forums to see how other people structured their workflows. I had only experience in one email workflow, which was copying and pasting. So I wanted to really see what other people did. Incidentally, I was already going to a conference in Boston, originally called the Email Design Conference, and now known as Litmus Live. And there I heard talks about people using modular design to create customizable emails with interchangeable parts, automating building processes, and inserting dynamic content into emails. These sounded like great solutions to the problems I was facing. Honestly, it's probably something all email professionals deal with. The systems they used were not known to me, and there were terms that I'd heard, but I didn't really know anything about, like task runners, gulp, grunt, node NPN, concatenation, and some other things like that. So at this conference, I learned about a software at the service of Litmus, which is kind of sad because they put on the service, but I had never heard of nor used the service. And when I was at the event, I found out that it actually could do many of it could solve many of the problems that I had. It would allow me to make templates, and I could organize pieces together and put them into code in snippets. And then I could use those snippets in different templates. The real problem was about pricing, which was $79 a month. Litmus had many great features, but a lot of that stuff that they wanted to do, we already handled in-house. And I didn't feel that we would use that. So to me, it didn't feel like good value for money. We were a small company, and every penny counts. So not wanting to lose my mind, the only option I could think of was to create my own system that would allow me to make templates and then inject data into them and convert them into HTML. Sounds like this decision is pretty easy. Seems pretty straightforward, doesn't it? But it wasn't. You think that working through this process, my fears would go away and I'd finally be comfortable. It didn't. This process didn't stop being scary or stop me from being afraid of screwing up. The more I progressed, the more worried I'd get about feeling out of place. It felt like it was just waiting for that moment of failure or running into a wall of progress. What happened was more a fear to fix a fear. The choice was to choose a potentially long and scary road of learning versus mental torture and pain of reverting to the manual process and the headache that was included with it. So weighing my fears, learning versus losing my mind, seems like a no-brainer. So when I thought of it, learning really paired in comparison to losing my mind. So some of the fears that I had and I thought of were learning new programs and languages, the process being too hard to understand or learn, and obviously just utter failure. Though these fears did cross my mind and I was really worried about them, the biggest personal fear I had was damaging my computer, messing with the command line. I don't know about you, times are tough and computers are expensive, and I don't have another $2,000 to pay for another one. Most importantly, if it was my work computer, I was really afraid to think of what would happen if I broke it. Like, I don't even know what the steps are for getting back the data or just general damage to a computer. So it was really scary to think about messing with those. So now, after going all the fears and the solutions, now that I know the problem and what I could do to solve them, I also had an idea of what technologies I would use to make this happen. Bear with me, we're about to get a little technical. So I decided to use a modular layout, which would improve the consistency in the email and breaking down the layout into parts that could be changed and parts that would stay the same. It also speed up development because the pieces would just need to be put together and not completely created each time. Using a templating system works well with the modular layout. These templated pieces could be put into place in the modular layout and could change and adjust depending on the email. An external data management system would create a more consistent and centralized method to handle data. Things like sponsors, images, speakers, and the generic information would be consistent from email to email. Any changes would consistently go to past and future emails. And finally, with all these solutions, the development time would greatly decrease, but not sacrifice consistency or an attention to detail. So nothing ever goes as smoothly as you want it to. Roadblocks happen and are sadly inevitable. I had to overcome some simple but straightforward hurdles of my own, of not understanding any of the technologies that I was to be using. I got really frustrated a lot of times when working on my workflow. I felt like I was on the edge of understanding. Everything was working and made sense. I was adding more features, and I was so confident in what I was doing. And then it just would go to hell. Something that worked the last time I'd used the command line would be throwing errors all over the place. My files were not being created in the proper locations, and I swear I changed nothing in my Gulp file, but the functions I used just weren't working anymore. This is an exhausting feeling that makes you move ever closer to just giving up. But what it did teach me was an important lesson of this important part of this whole process, which is perseverance. So perseverance was crucial, especially when making something with no one to ask and no idea what you're doing beyond the sheer determination just to make it happen. And in retrospect, it sounds outright ridiculous, going to make something without having any knowledge of how to do it. But that's where I learned an important lesson. If you feel you don't know how to do it and you give up, what could you be giving up on? Don't let your lack of knowledge stop you from trying to make something. So the two biggest problems I ran into were things that I would only know after making this workflow for the first time. I had outlined everything pretty well, but knowing what the power of your process is and actually starting to use it are two vastly different things. After I was in the system, using it and making changes to it, I realized that my needs were not as simple as I thought and quickly ballooned into something large and complex. This was very surprising and caused some stress in the moments where I was really crunched for time. I got through by pure determination because I'll be damned if I'm going back to one-off uses. One-off uses were the cause of so much headache in the first place. So I spent hours creating the changes necessary to make something reusable so I wouldn't have to manually do it again. So here's a little bit on how I made the system. It's about more of the principles and at the very end a little more code. So the most important rule/principle of creating this whole workflow is don't reinvent the wheel. There's probably someone who has the same or similar idea as you. See if you can build upon something before you just start from scratch, especially if you're not an expert in whatever you're doing. You can always make changes later. Find someone's work and see if you can use that as a jump-off point. That's what I did. I did a GitHub search for Gulp email workflow and just picked a repo and decided to break it down and figure out what I wanted it to use it for and how I could replicate the creator's intent. Personally, for me, I still didn't have a working knowledge of how all this worked when I started the search. And a lot of the terms seemed like gibberish and didn't make sense. It took a few articles and tutorials for me to start the trial and error phase of learning. And after a few months, a lot of trial and error to figure out things like how errors work. If you don't alert an error, the whole system stops working. You have to restart it each time. It's really annoying. And stuff like image optimizing and how concatenation works, which are pretty important. So this is the breakdown of the system. The system comprises of two different files, being the data file, which in my case is a JSON file, and the templating file, which is a nunjuk file, that are merged together using Gulp, which is the task runner, to create an email, which is HTML. These things would then be, the HTML file would be created from Gulp injecting the data into the template, and then that would be put into distribution folder and be ready for deployment. So this is the breakdown of the data file. It's just straight JSON, and it contains information such as things for the city and the speaker. So for speakers, it has their images, bios, schedules, more than that. And for each city, it had things like their dates, times, locations, all of the various prices, and any other information that you needed for a successful event. The template files were broken down into three different files. The first file type is what I would call the main file. So this is the control file that wraps important information that doesn't change around the files. So it's stuff like header, footer information, and things that the individual emails will eventually need. This is the second file type, which is the specific email layout file. This example is email number 8. This contains everything to render that specific email. It's the basis for that layout, and it contains certain special things like all the various, variables and price. The example here would be the ticket types. So you have about 3 or 4 of them up there, and that's the variables of what it would show. It could either show early bird 49 or whatever 79, things like that. And this is the third file type. This file type controls the layout-specific file type. It has all the information to put the email-specific layout and decide some of the values. So like I just said before about the last chance is 79 or the early bird is 49, it also tells you which city this will be, what the pre-header text should be, what the title can be, and any other information that you want to put in there. So finally, the benefits for the company for this workflow system came out when I was able to make more things now. Making the system, I was able to create and maintain emails much better. My development time went down, and I could generate lots of things faster. I also use this system to actually incorporate in all the different emails that I did create so I can make all of them faster. This freed me up to concentrate on other things at my job, like working on wireframes, flowcharts, and using new technology to advance our websites, making it easier to do more tasks and give them all the attention they deserve and not be treated like secondary citizens. This system was also used as an inspiration to take to another level by a coworker who created a React version of this workflow that was easy to use for non-development folk. The benefits for me could be summed up by this quote. Personally for me, I'd originally given up before I'd even begun, and if I didn't persevere and work through my fear, I would not have completed this workflow. I worked through with having no knowledge and gained so much. I've learned so much that has changed how I approach my projects, the type of projects I want to do, and my confidence of using new and emerging technologies. And that's it. Thanks.